I had a stroke alone in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, and my son was in Las Vegas celebrating his promotion. The hospital called him 31 times. He never picked up once. 4 days later, when I finally opened my eyes, the first face I saw wasn't his. It was a woman I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, sitting in the chair beside my bed, holding my hand like she'd been there the whole time. Because she had been. And when my son finally called me back, he didn't ask how I was. He asked whether I'd updated my will. Before I tell you the rest of the story, I want you to know something. I'm 68 years old. I raised my son alone after his father left when he was 4. I worked double shifts as a registered nurse for 31 years so he could have everything I never did. I drove him to every baseball practice, every school play, every college interview. I was at his wedding with a smile on my face, even though his wife had never once looked me in the eyes. I am telling you all of this, not for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand exactly what I had built and exactly what my son was willing to take from me. My name is Margaret, and this is what happened when I almost died and discovered that my own child had been preparing for my death long before it arrived. It was a Tuesday in early March, nothing remarkable about it. I'd retired 3 years earlier from County General after 31 years in the cardiac unit, which has always struck me as bitterly ironic given what happened next. I was making oatmeal, standing at the stove in my kitchen, the one with the yellow curtains I'd sewn myself the summer after Daniel was born. The morning light was coming through the window the way it does in early spring, pale and tentative, and I remember thinking I needed to call the garden center about my tomato seedlings. Then my right hand went numb. I know what a stroke feels like. I'd seen hundreds of them in 31 years. I knew the moment it happened, the numbness spreading up my arm, the strange tilting sensation in my vision, the way the left side of my face felt suddenly like it belonged to someone else. I remember grabbing the counter. I remember the oatmeal still bubbling on the stove. I remember thinking, with the strange calm that sometimes comes in the worst moments, that I needed to turn off the burner. I didn't make it to the burner. My neighbor Ruth found me 40 minutes later when she came to return a pie dish. She told me afterward that she heard something fall and knocked first, then let herself in with the spare key I'd given her 2 Christmases ago for exactly this kind of reason. I had no memory of any of it. By the time I was aware of anything again, I was in the emergency room at Mercy General with an IV in my arm and a young doctor with tired eyes explaining words I already knew the meaning of. Ischemic stroke, moderate severity, right hemisphere. Surgery to remove the clot, recovery possible but uncertain. Ruth was there when I woke up properly 3 days later. Not my son. Ruth, who is 74 years old and drives a 15-year-old Buick and brings me soup when it rains. She was sitting in the chair beside my bed with a crossword puzzle in her lap, and when she saw my eyes open, she put it down very slowly, the way people do when they're trying not to startle someone fragile. "There she is," she said softly. "There's my Margaret." I tried to speak and couldn't at first. My throat was dry and strange. She held a cup with a straw to my lips and I drank, and then I tried again. "My son," I said. My voice came out scraped and thin. Ruth's expression did something I couldn't quite read. It moved through several things quickly before settling into something careful and neutral, the way a person's face moves when they're deciding how much of the truth to give you. "The hospital has been trying to reach him, honey," she said. "They'll keep trying." I closed my eyes. "Tried 3 times, I told myself. Maybe his phone died. Maybe he and his wife were somewhere without reception. They traveled a lot. He worked hard, long hours, demanding clients. There were always reasonable explanations. I had spent 20 years finding them. The nurse came in, a solidly built woman named Carol, who reminded me of nurses I had worked alongside for decades, efficient and kind in the same practiced way. She explained what had happened, what the surgery had involved, what my recovery would look like. She spoke to me the way I used to speak to patients, with patience and without condescension, and I was grateful for it. When she finished, she asked if I had any questions. "Has anyone reached my son?" I asked. Carol glanced at Ruth. And in that glance was everything. "We've made 31 calls to the number on file," she said carefully. "We've left messages. We'll continue to try." 31 calls. The number sat in my chest like a stone. Ruth waited until Carol left. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone with the reluctance of someone handing over evidence in a courtroom. "Honey," she said, "I need to show you something. I debated whether to wait, but I think you need to see it before he calls. Before you're caught off guard." She found what she was looking for and turned the phone toward me. My son's face looked back at me from the screen, tanned and grinning, a drink in his hand, the Las Vegas Strip blazing behind him. His wife was beside him in a silver dress, her arm around his waist, both of them squinting into bright lights with the loose, easy expressions of people who had no weight on their shoulders at all. The caption read, "Vegas baby. Promotion well earned. No emails, no calls, total disconnect. Living our best life." Posted Sunday night, the night before I had my stroke. Ruth scrolled without being asked. Another photo, Monday afternoon. My son at a pool, sunglasses laughing, his wife holding up a cocktail with a little umbrella. Caption: Day 2, and we are not sorry. Monday afternoon. I had already been in surgery for 4 hours by then. Tuesday morning. My son at a breakfast buffet, plate piled high, coffee in hand. Caption: Fueling up for a big day. Vegas delivers. Ruth stopped scrolling. I looked at the photos for a long time. I looked at my son's face, the face I had watched learn to smile, learn to read, learn to drive, learn to leave. I looked at the ease in his body, the contentment in his expression. The photos of a man with no weight in the world. He had service, I said. My voice was very flat. He did, Ruth said. He's been posting every day. There it was then. 31 calls, days of messages, surgery, stroke, ICU, and my son had been at a buffet with a plate piled high, captioning his coffee. I handed the phone back to Ruth and looked at the ceiling tiles. I'd looked at a lot of ceilings in hospitals over the years. I'd stood on the other side of this moment more times than I could count. The moment when a patient understands that the person they were waiting for is not coming. I had always tried to be gentle in those moments. I had always tried to give those patients dignity. Now I understood in my body what that moment actually felt like. I want to tell you about the woman who was there instead. Her name is Diane. We met 18 years ago in the oncology ward at County General, where she was sitting beside her mother's bed on the third night of a vigil no one else in her family would share. I was the night nurse on that floor that week, and I kept bringing her coffee. She didn't ask for it because I recognized something in her face that I had seen in my own mirror after Daniel's father left. The look of someone doing something enormous, entirely alone. Her mother passed on a Thursday. Diane stayed until the end, and then she stayed to help with the paperwork, and then she came back the next day to bring flowers for the nurses' station because, she said, nurses never got enough flowers. We've been friends ever since. She called every Sunday. She came at Thanksgiving when Daniel and his wife had other plans, which was most years. When my hip replacement had put me flat for 6 weeks, 2 years ago, Diane had driven 40 minutes each way 3 times a week to bring groceries and sit with me and watch old movies until I could walk properly again. She had been at Mercy General within 2 hours of Ruth's call. She was the first face I saw when I woke up. She was there every day of my recovery, morning visiting hours until they made her leave at night. She brought my crossword puzzles. She brought the specific brand of peppermint tea that helps my throat. She argued pleasantly with a physical therapist about my recovery schedule and turned out to be right. She washed my hair on day 4 when I finally felt steady enough to try, sitting on a chair in the hospital bathroom with a cup and the gentle, matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who loves you without needing you to be grateful. She owed me nothing. We shared no blood. She was 66 years old and had her own life. Her own plans, her own early mornings. She rearranged all of it without being asked. My son called on day 5. By then I was sitting up, eating solid food, working through the first set of speech exercises my therapist had assigned. My right hand was still weaker than I wanted it to be. Diane was beside me, reading, when the phone on my bedside table lit up with my son's name. She saw it first. She looked at me, not at the phone. "Do you want a minute?" she asked. "Stay," I said. I picked up. "Mom." His voice came through in a rush, warm and urgent, the voice he used when he needed something to be smoothed over quickly. "Mom, oh thank God, I just got your messages." We had absolutely no service the entire trip. The hotel system was down. I've been out of my mind with worry. I had 30 years of nursing in me, 30 years of listening to people in crisis and people performing crisis. I knew the difference in my bones. "You posted on social media every day," I said. My voice was steady, including the morning after my surgery. A pause. Brief but real. "Those were scheduled posts, Mom. We set them up before we left." I thought about that. Diane had quietly set down her book. "All of them?" I asked. "Including the one where you tagged your current location at the breakfast buffet?" Another pause. Longer. "Mom, I don't understand why I'm calling you right now. I've been worried sick." "The hospital called you 31 times, I said. "I had a stroke. I had surgery. I was unconscious for 3 days." "I know, and I'm so sorry. If I had known how serious would it have needed to be?" I asked, not unkindly. Genuinely. He shifted into a different gear then. The warm urgency became something more careful, more managed. He asked about my prognosis. He asked about the treatment plan. He said all the right medical questions in the right order, and I thought, not for the first time, that my son had learned somewhere along the way how to sound like he was paying attention without actually paying anything at all. "We'll come this weekend," he said. "Saturday morning, first thing. Bring some food, spend the day." "All right," I said. I hung up and looked at Diane. "He's coming Saturday," I said. "I heard," she said. She didn't say anything else, which is one of the things I have always loved about her. My son and his wife arrived Saturday at 11, not first thing. They came with a gift bag from a grocery store, the kind with tissue paper and a candle inside, the kind you buy in 10 minutes without much thought. My daughter-in-law was pleasant in the specific way she had always been pleasant with me, which is to say she spoke to me at the correct volume and smiled at the correct moments, and said very little that connected one sentence to the next. My son hugged me carefully, the way people hug someone they're slightly afraid of breaking, and then sat in the chair beside my bed and talked for 20 minutes about Vegas, the restaurants, the shows, his promotion, what it meant for their future, the new account he'd be managing, the possibility of a bonus by Q3. He asked about my recovery in the same general way you might ask about traffic, present and necessary, but not really interesting. His wife checked her phone twice that I counted. Then, at the 40-minute mark, my son leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, which is his posture for when he is about to say something he has rehearsed. "Mom," he said, "now that you've had this health scare, we think it might be time to talk seriously about your living situation." I looked at him. "Your living situation," I said. "You're alone in that house. It's a big property for one person. If something like this happens again..." He glanced at his wife, who gave a small, supportive nod. "We've actually been doing some research. There are some incredible facilities nearby. Independent living, really more like a resort. Very high-end. And it might make financial sense to sell the house," I said. "It's a lot of maintenance, Mom. And the market right now, I see," I said. We looked at each other. "I'll think about it," I said. They left at 1 o'clock. My son kissed my cheek at the door. His wife said it was so good to see me looking so well, and they were gone. Diane came in from the hallway, where she had been getting coffee with such precise timing that I suspected she had simply stood outside the door. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I need you to do me a favor," I said. I asked her to go to my house. I needed clothes, my own pillow, the novel from my nightstand, and one other thing. The stack of mail that had accumulated while I'd been in the hospital, which Ruth had been collecting and leaving on my kitchen counter. I wanted all of it. Diane brought everything the next morning. The clothes, the pillow, the novel, and the mail, rubber-banded together, sitting on top of the bag with an expression on Diane's face that I had not seen before. Still and careful, like she was carrying something that might shatter. "There's a letter," she said, "in the pile." I didn't open it, but the return address. She paused. You should see it. It was a thick envelope from a place called Harborview Senior Living. The return address was in the county north of mine. My name was typed on the front in a font that managed to be both friendly and clinical. Inside was a brochure. Glossy photos of cheerful communal dining rooms and sunlit common areas, elderly people doing watercolors and playing cards, smiling the particular smiles of people who've been professionally photographed into contentment. On the cover, in elegant letters, independent and assisted living, personalized care, peace of mind for the whole family. Tucked behind the brochure was a welcome packet, pre-filled. Resident name, Margaret Calloway. Age 68. Reason for inquiry checked from a printed list. Lives alone, checked. Recent medical event, checked. Family concerns regarding safety, checked. Difficulty managing household independently, checked. Every box. Everyone a decision someone had made on my behalf. At the bottom of the form, in my son's handwriting, was his name and phone number listed under family contact initiating inquiry. The postmark was dated 9 days before my stroke. I sat with that for a long time. Diane sat with me, not speaking, understanding that this was a moment that needed to be lived through rather than talked through. 9 days before I collapsed, my son had already been filling out paperwork to have me placed in a facility. While I had been tending my tomato seedlings and making plans for spring, my son had been planning a different future for me entirely. I thought about the phone calls. He had been researching facilities. He had called our neighbor Patricia 2 weeks ago, Diane told me later, asking whether I'd seemed forgetful lately, whether I was managing the yard, whether she'd noticed anything concerning. He'd called my friend Beverly from church the same week with similar questions, planting seeds, building a record. I thought about his face when he mentioned selling the house, the market right now. I thought about his wife's small supportive nod. I had spent 68 years building a life. The house I owned outright, paid off the year before Robert retired. Robert's life insurance, which I had managed carefully since he died 7 years ago. My own pension from 31 years of nursing. Not a fortune, but a life's worth of work and discipline and sacrifice. And my son had been making arrangements. I looked at Diane across the hospital room. I need a lawyer, I said. Her name is Frances Holt. She has been in family and estate law for 34 years, and when I explained my situation to her on the phone from my hospital room, she was quiet for a moment and then said, with a dryness that I found immediately comforting, "Mrs. Calloway, you are not the first person to call me from a hospital bed with this particular story." She came to Mercy General to meet me. We spoke for an hour. I told her everything in order. The stroke, the 31 calls, the social media posts, the 40-minute visit, the conversation about my living situation, the Harborview packet with my son's handwriting on it. I put the brochure on the table between us and watched her look at it. He initiated this inquiry 9 days before your stroke, she said. Yes. Were there other signals before that? Financial conversations? Questions about the house? About your accounts? There had been. I hadn't put them together until this moment, but they were there when I looked back. A conversation at Christmas about the property value of my neighborhood. An offhand comment about whether I really needed such a large house for one person. A question about whether I'd ever thought about simplifying my finances. I had answered all of them honestly, thinking they were idle curiosity. I understood now they were inventory. What are my options? I asked. Frances told me. I left the hospital 9 days after I arrived. My right hand was still weaker than I liked, and I had speech exercises to practice every morning, and I got tired more easily than I was accustomed to. But I was home in my kitchen with the yellow curtains, and the tomato seedlings were still alive on the back porch because Ruth had been watering them every day without being asked. I sat in the chair by the window where I do my best thinking. I thought about my son at 4 years old, sitting on the kitchen floor with a coloring book while I worked the night shift paperwork. I thought about driving him to the ER at 2 in the morning when he was 11 and had broken his arm falling from the oak tree in the backyard. I thought about the letter I'd written to his college admissions office when they put him on the wait list. 4 handwritten pages that his counselor later told me had made the difference. I thought about all the years that had followed, the way his visits had slowly become shorter, the way his calls had slowly become less frequent, the way his wife had slowly absorbed more and more of the space where I used to be until I was barely a guest in my own son's life. I thought about the Harborview brochure with its glossy photos and its checked boxes and my son's handwriting. And then I called Frances Holt and told her to proceed. My son called me on a Wednesday, 12 days after my discharge. He used the warm, urgent voice again. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation at the hospital, about the living situation. I really do think we should sit down properly and talk it through. The house, your finances, all of it. Make sure everything's in order, especially after the health scare. Would you be willing to meet with me and Sarah? We could do lunch." "I'd like to do that," I said. "Actually, I have a meeting with my attorney next Thursday to review some estate documents. You should both be there." A beat. Estate documents? "Just updates," I said. "Routine, after a health event. Frances likes everyone present. 2 o'clock. "Of course," he said immediately. "We'll be there." He would be. I knew he would be. Frances's office occupied the second floor of a Victorian building on the main street of town, the kind of office with dark wood and afternoon light, and the particular quiet of a place where serious things happen. I arrived early with Diane, who came because I asked her to, because she belonged there more than anyone else who would be sitting at that table. My son and his wife arrived at 1 minute to 2 in the manner of people who have calculated exactly how early to arrive to appear prompt without appearing eager. My son wore the gray blazer he reserves for important meetings. His wife had her hair done. They stopped walking when they saw Diane. "What is she doing here?" my son asked. Not rudely, but with the specific discomfort of someone whose plan has encountered an unexpected variable. "Diane is here at my request," I said. "Please sit down." Frances handled the opening with the professional even-handedness of someone who has navigated more tense rooms than this one. She explained that we were here to review the updated terms of my estate, that all changes had been made voluntarily, and that a cognitive evaluation conducted by my neurologist the previous week had confirmed that I was of sound mind. A document she slid across the table before anyone could think to raise the question. My son looked at the document. His wife's expression shifted by very little, but by enough. "Before we go through the documents," I said, "I want to say some things." "Mom, if this is about Vegas, I'm not finished," I said. "Quiet. Steady." The room held. "The hospital called you 31 times," I said. "I had a stroke. I had surgery. I was unconscious for 3 days. You were posting on social media about your promotion and your buffet breakfast, and your total disconnect from the real world. I had the screenshots printed. I set them on the table without drama. While I was in surgery, you posted about not being sorry." My son opened his mouth. "I also know about the calls," I said, "to Patricia, to Beverly from church, asking whether I seemed forgetful, whether I was managing alone, whether I was declining. I let that land. I know about Harborview Senior Living. I set the brochure on the table, the welcome packet beneath it, the checked boxes facing up. I know you initiated that inquiry 9 days before my stroke. I know my name is on that form in your handwriting. And I know what's on the financials page, the questions about my house, my pension, my accounts." The room was very quiet. My son's face had gone through several things and arrived somewhere that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite guilt. It was the face of someone calculating. "Mom," he said carefully, "we were concerned. You're 68, you're alone, and after your father died," I said, "you came for the funeral and left 4 days later. You have visited me 11 times in 7 years. 11, I counted. I had. Last Thanksgiving, you sent a gift card. Christmas before last, you called on the 27th to say you'd been busy. You have met your obligations to me precisely. You have never exceeded them." His wife looked at the table. "And then I had a stroke," I said, "and you were unreachable for 5 days. And when you came to the hospital, you talked about Vegas for 20 minutes and then asked about selling my house." I paused. "That is who you have chosen to be. I'm not angry. I'm clear. You can't honestly be planning to, my son started. Francis, I said. Francis opened the folder. To Diane Beaumont, my closest friend and the only person who was present when I needed someone most. $40,000 in gratitude and in recognition of what chosen family actually means. My daughter-in-law made a small sound. My son had gone very still. To Grace Covenant Church, $30,000 for the community meal program that fed my neighbors through 3 winters. To County General Hospital's Nursing Scholarship Fund established in the name of patients who recovered against the odds, $50,000. This one I had thought about for a long time. It felt right. The house I was keeping. Francis explained this clearly. It would pass upon my death to a charitable trust, the structure of which would prevent it from being sold for private benefit. To my grandson, Oliver, my son's child who is 4 years old and knows his grandmother mostly from photographs, a college trust of $75,000. Protected, trusteed through Francis's office, accessible at 18 for education only. His parents would have no access and no authority over its management. $75,000 to a child, my son said. His voice had the particular flatness of someone who has done math and found the answer unacceptable. And the rest? The rest, Francis said, has been allocated as described. Mrs. Calloway retains funds for her own care and living expenses. The estate will be administered by this office. This is insane, my son said. Not loudly. He was too controlled for that. You are punishing us for one trip. You filled out paperwork to have me institutionalized, I said. Before I was sick, you called my neighbors to build a case that I was declining. You ignored 31 calls while I was in surgery, and then you came to my hospital room and asked about selling my house. I looked at him steadily. That is not one trip. That is a pattern, and I am done making excuses for it. His wife touched his arm. He stood up. You'll regret this, he said. I've already regretted things, I said. I regret the years I spent making myself smaller so you'd find me easier to be around. I regret the excuses I made. I don't think I'll regret this. He left. His wife followed, her heels very precise on the wooden floor. The door closed. Diane exhaled beside me. Are you all right? She asked. I thought about it honestly. I think so, I said. The weeks that followed were harder than I expected, not because of doubt, but because grief doesn't require you to be wrong. I had lost my son twice, once slowly over years, and once in a conference room on a Thursday afternoon, and both losses were real. I cried about it with Diane. I talked about it with Francis's recommended therapist, a woman named Dr. Park who had the useful quality of saying difficult true things without flinching. I talked about it with Ruth over coffee on my back porch, while the tomato seedlings grew into something that actually resembled plants. My son called twice in the first month, once angry, once conciliatory, both times circling back to the same question in different clothing. I kept my answers brief and my boundaries clear. He stopped calling after that. What I didn't lose was Oliver. My son's wife brought him to me 6 weeks after the confrontation. I was sitting on my front porch reading when the car pulled up, and I thought for a moment that my heart, which had already been tested enough, might simply stop from the sight of him climbing out of the back seat, 4 years old, wearing rubber boots with frogs on them and carrying a crumpled piece of paper. Grandma, he said, I made you something. It was a drawing in green and blue crayon, a house with a large sun above it, and 2 stick figures in the yard, one tall and one small. He had written his name at the bottom in the large, careful letters of someone who has recently learned how they go. I held it with my weaker right hand and my stronger left hand and did not trust myself to speak for a moment. His mother stood by the car. We looked at each other over his head. She was younger than I'd ever let myself notice, and her face in that moment had something in it that wasn't calculation, something that looked like a person who had been watching something unfold and had finally decided to stand in a different place. He's been asking about you, she said. Every day. Thank you for bringing him, I said. She nodded. She waited in the car while Oliver and I sat on the porch, and he told me about his rubber boots and the frog he had seen last Tuesday in the backyard, and his best friend at preschool whose name was Marcus, and who had a dog named Cloud. I listened to all of it. I asked questions. I made him a peanut butter sandwich and poured him a small glass of apple juice and watched him eat with the solemn focus that 4-year-olds bring to peanut butter. Before he left, he hugged me around the waist with both arms and said into my cardigan, "I like your house, Grandma." "I like it too," I said. He has come back 4 times since then. Each time his mother brings him, waits, takes him home. We haven't spoken much beyond pleasantries, but she keeps bringing him, and I keep making peanut butter sandwiches, and Oliver keeps growing, and I have decided that this is enough for now, that some things repair themselves in their own time if you give them the room. It is May now. The tomatoes Ruth kept alive while I was in the hospital have grown into something ambitious and sprawling that requires a proper cage, which Diane helped me build on a Saturday afternoon while we argue pleasantly about the best way to tie the vines. My right hand is nearly back to what it was. I walk 2 miles every morning, a little slower than before, a little more aware of the miracle of being upright and moving through the world under my own power. I volunteer at the hospital twice a week now, not in the cardiac unit, but in the family waiting rooms, the places where people sit for hours waiting to hear news about someone they love. I bring coffee. I sit with people. Sometimes I tell them gently that whatever they're feeling is allowed. Sometimes I just sit. I know what it is to wait in those rooms now. I know it from both sides. Diane and I have plans for July. A road trip up the coast, something neither of us has done before. We've been researching bed and breakfasts and deciding which ones look like the kind of place where the breakfast is actually worth getting up for. We leave on the 12th, and I have already packed more books than is strictly reasonable, and I am looking forward to it with an uncomplicated happiness that surprises me every time I think about it. Oliver's drawing is on my refrigerator, the crayon house with the large sun and the 2 stick figures in the yard. I look at it every morning when I take my medications. Every morning, I think about what it takes to draw something like that. The trust in it, the simple willingness to put something you made into someone else's hands. My son has not called in 5 weeks. Some mornings this sits heavily, and some mornings it doesn't. I have stopped trying to predict which kind of morning it will be and started simply seeing what each one brings. What I know, sitting in my kitchen with the yellow curtains in May, is this. I spent 31 years as a nurse because I believed that being present when someone needed you was the most important thing a person could do. I believed it professionally and I believed it personally, and I built my life around it. The double shifts, the phone calls, the 4-page college admissions letter, the 31 years of showing up. What I learned from a stroke in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning in March is that presence is not owed by blood. It is given by choice. And the people who choose to give it, the Diandes and the Ruths and the Carols who bring coffee and stay late and water your tomatoes while you're unconscious, those people are your family. Not because they have to be, because they decided to be. My son made his choices, so did I. And if you are listening to this and you have been making yourself small, making excuses, answering every call from someone who stopped answering yours a long time ago, I want you to hear this from someone who learned it later than she should have. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to look at the evidence of someone's choices and believe it. You are allowed to decide that love, real love, should not require you to disappear. I am 68 years old. I survived a stroke alone in my kitchen. I lost my son. Or perhaps I finally stopped pretending I hadn't already lost him years ago. I found my family in the people who showed up, and I am planning a road trip in July with my best friend, and my grandson calls me Grandma in the voice of someone who means it. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is mine.